in Texas, the Department of Justice, headed up by none other than, I thought the Klan was okay till I found out that they smoked weed, Jeff Sessions, has decided not to continue challenging in court the Texas voter ID law. So prior to the change, President Obama and his administration, they were challenging. They're actually in a lawsuit against the state of Texas because of their voter ID laws. And in a motion filed today, the DOJ, now underneath new leadership, underneath the Trump administration, has asked the federal court to dismiss the department's earlier claim that the voter ID law was enacted with the intention of discriminating against minority voters. See how easy it is? Jeff Sessions is hard at work already. This is Jeff Sessions hard at work. The look at the thing that's most important to him. Last week we talked about he wants to crack down on marijuana usage on the state level. And last week we saw the Trump administration has decided to use federal for-profit prisons for the federal system. Right. So this is the focus of Jeff Sessions and the Department of Justice underneath his leadership. And now they've decided, whereas the Obama administration was challenging the state of Texas with regard to these voter ID laws, now he's saying, never mind. Because one, Republicans are all about voter ID laws, no matter how much it is proven that it disproportionately disenfranchises minorities, particularly African Americans. And with the Supreme Court's gutting of the Voting Rights Act, now the federal government has even less capacity to oversee these states, which have historically disenfranchised people of color, minorities, at the voting booth. And now, in the midst of all those things, the priority of this Department of Justice is to say, never mind, Texas, go ahead and create all of the draconian, disenfranchising voter ID laws that you possibly want. Well, Ben, it should be easy for somebody to go get a voter ID. Yeah, in certain states, you know how far you have to drive to just get an ID? In Alabama, not only did they require you to get an ID, they simultaneously closed a bevy of locations, making it even more difficult to get a voter ID, notwithstanding the fact that people who are what's the rate of poverty in the African? I think it's 28% of African Americans living in poverty, right? So 28% of African Americans living in poverty, and nearly, I believe, 50% make less than like $40,000 a year. And everyone say, oh, it's cheap. It's cheap to get a voter ID. Yeah. Try adding one more thing to your budget when you're already, try adding one more $25 thing to your budget when you're already living paycheck to paycheck, or you're already living in poverty. On top of that, try taking a day off of your job to actually go get a voter ID, because in a lot of these locations, you won't be able to get it on the weekend. Or if you get it on the weekend, you have to wait. There are so many barriers to this. This is essentially a poll tax. A poll tax that's meant to disenfranchise, but specifically disenfranchise people that would likely not vote with the Republican Party. And we discussed this several weeks ago. We've discussed it many times. The former Pennsylvania GOP chair who had to resign because he accidentally stated that the purpose of the voter ID law back in 2012 was to help Mitt Romney get elected. So despite all of the evidence, despite all the research that shows that this disproportionately affects people of color, the Department of Justice, underneath the leadership of the Klan, used to be cool until I found out they smoked marijuana, Jeff Sessions, feels like there's no need for the federal government to worry about this case anymore. A federal appeals court last year agreed that the law had a discriminatory impact. there's a statement here from Gary Herbert, the campaign legal center, which represents some of the plaintiffs in the case. He said, quote, "I'm appalled and disgusted that the DOJ would abandon their claims that they have advocated for the last 6 years. And Texas photo ID law was enacted with a racially discriminatory purpose." And now, raise your hand if you're surprised that Jeff Sessions, the Klan was cool until I found out they smoked marijuana, Jeff Sessions, puts the #1 priority on his list to abandon this pursuit of voter justice.